this is our third session together, talking about raising children and some of the biblical insights into the child-rearing task. And in many ways, this session that I will teach in this hour really builds upon and makes application of the previous session. The previous session, we talked about the heart. The fact that the heart is the wellspring of life. We live out of our hearts. All the hopes, the dreams, the aspirations of the person reside within the heart, and from the heart they set the course of life. So we looked at that truth and sought to lay that truth out. Let me just read a portion of the passage in Matthew chapter 15 that is the parallel. And in many ways, I will be giving an extended application of this truth in this next hour. So I'm just taking the truth that we built in the last hour and building a superstructure upon it, so we see the implications of it for raising kids. Peter said, "Explain the parable to us. Are you so dull?" Jesus says. "Don't you see that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body? But the things that come from the mouth come from the heart, and these are what make a man, or we could say a child, unclean. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. These are what make a child unclean, but eating with unwashed hands does not make him unclean." Remember, Jesus is responding to the charge of the Pharisees that the disciples have defiled themselves because they've eaten without ceremonial washing. And therefore, they are defiled through what they have eaten. And Jesus rebukes them very forthrightly and explains to them that that is not an accurate understanding, that you're not defiled by what you eat. What you eat passes through you, but what defiles you is what comes from within. And of course, it's out of the heart that all these evils flow, Jesus says. Now, if we get a hold of that truth, what helps us to understand is that what our children say and do flows from the heart. Proverbs 4:23, "Above all else, guard your heart, for it is a wellspring of life." So we can't understand behavior in a biblical vision and ignore the heart. We cannot address behavior biblically and ignore the heart, because the heart is the wellspring. The behavior is just simply an external manifestation of what's going on internally. It's the internal that we're concerned with our children, not just external performance, but we're concerned with what's going on inside. So if we wanted to build on that concept, one of the ways we could do that is thinking about it in this way. Ungodly behavior always begins with attitudes of heart. And those attitudes of heart are reflected in the behavior. And parallel to that, we could think of it this way, that godly behavior begins with heart attitudes that are seen in the behavior. So that's how the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. Now let's take a very common problem that you have. If you have more than one child in a family, you've seen this. Even if you're a one-child family, you have a visitor coming to visit, you will see this behavior. Two children fighting over the same toy. Two kids, one toy. Now, how are you going to resolve that in a biblical perspective? When our children were young, we have three children, a boy, a girl, and a boy. When they were young, we used to ask the question, okay, who had it first? Now, if you think about it, who had it first doesn't really deal with the heart. It really looks at this as a justice question, and it says justice is in the favor of whoever had it first. So the person that had it first gets to keep it. The person that didn't have it first should go away and find something else to play with. Who had it first? And your children are very clever. If you make who had it first the standard, your children will respond to that standard, and they'll make sure they're the ones that had it first. One of our sons got up before anyone else in the house, and he had hidden all the good toys all over the house. So he had them all first, and he had the rights to all the toys. I remember taking a kind of a perverse pride in his cleverness. When my brother Paul came to visit, his oldest son went into the playroom and he touched all the toys. Now I thought, this is a strange ritual. What is he doing? Is he blessing the toys? Well, Paul and his wife had something they would do with their kids. If you had something you were playing with and you set it down for a minute, someone could just take it. You could say, hey, I was playing with that. So you see what his son had done. Hey, I was playing with that and that and that and that and that. In his mind, he had proprietary rights to all the toys in the room. He had them all first. And we see that kind of response on the part of children. They are very quick to assert their right. They had it first. Now, if you think about it more carefully with me, if you have two children fighting over the same toy, and we want to approach this from a biblical standpoint and say, okay, what is the heart issue? What attitude of heart might be behind the fight over the toy? What's the abundance of the heart when I'm fighting to maintain my right over this toy and deny you any use of the toy? What's going on within? At the very least, we could say it's a reflection of love of self. Because when I have children fighting over the toy, I don't have a victim and a perpetrator. I have two selfish children. The one child who has the toy is saying, in effect, to his sibling, I know you would like to play with it. I know you've been waiting for it for a long time. I know I've been playing with it for quite a while. And I know you would like it, but in fact, I was almost done playing with it. But now that I know that you want it, you have renewed my interest in this toy. The other child is saying, in effect, I know there are 100 other toys in the house I can play with. The only toy in this house that I'm interested in is the one that you have, and I will do whatever I have to do to get it from you. You see the problem? I don't have a victim and a perpetrator. I have two selfish children here. Two children who are both full of self-love, both determined to do whatever will make them happy, both preoccupied with their own self-interest, and both willing to deny the other person an opportunity to enjoy the toy because they have it, they want it, or because I want to get it from you. But either way, I have two selfish children here. I don't have a victim or a perpetrator. Now here's our problem as parents. So often in parenting, we look at the behavior, fighting over the toy. We'd rather see sharing the toy. And we isolate that behavior. And we think, how can I change this behavior from fighting over the toy behavior to sharing the toy behavior? And we forget all about the heart. Now, excuse me, why would we do that? We know that it's out of the overflow of the heart that the mouth speaks. That the problem here is not just that I have two kids and one toy. The problem is I have two selfish children. We know that it is a heart issue. But why do we ignore the heart and just simply focus on behavior? Well, the answer is very obvious. If you think about it, we see behavior. We hear behavior. Behavior requires a response. The children fighting over the toy is disturbing the peace of the home. And so we might say, okay, who had it first? And award it to the person that had it first. Or we might even do something else. We might set up a timer. And we put a little timer and we say, okay, for the next 5 minutes, you get to play with the toy. And when that timer chime rings, then you have to give it to your brother. And for the next 5 minutes, he gets to play with the toy. And then when the chimer rings, you have to give it to your brother. Now, have I solved the problem of selfishness in the heart? Have I solved the problem of compulsive self-love? No, I haven't solved the problem. I'm simply regulating the problem. But both of these children are operating out of the abundance of their hearts. And our temptation is to isolate the behavior and try to produce behavioral change and ignore the attitudes of heart that are behind the behavior to begin with. And so we try to move this behavior from the fighting over the toys behavior to sharing the toys behavior. And as I mentioned earlier, there are scores of ways we can do that. We can We can bribe our children, or we can heap shame on them, or we can load guilt on them, or we can threaten them. We can provide them with incentives or disincentives for fighting. There's scores of things we can do to solve the problem. I remember I was teaching this one time. Actually, I was talking about it to a man on the radio, and he said, well, let me tell you about what I did, and tell me if you think it's okay. So he said, my daughter, a 15-year-old girl, she's a good kid. She gets good grades. We don't have any trouble with her, but she is a complainer. When her mother, I asked her to do some simple tasks, she complains. And I got tired of the complaining. And so I came up with this great idea. I took $100, I put it in a jar, put it on the kitchen counter. I told her there's $100 in that jar. I want you to have it. At the end of 1 month, everything left in that jar is yours. I hope you have all $100. But here's the deal. There are $10 bills in there. Every time that you complain, if your mother or I ask you to do something, we're going to take one of those $10 bills out of the jar. At the end of 1 month, you get to have everything that's in the jar. Now, you see, this is a very high stakes game, because these are tens. They're not fives or singles. They're $10 bills. And she forgot herself at first. She was so much in the habit of complaining, oh, Daddy, do I have to do the dishes? And there's $90, $80, $70 left in the jar. He's taking $10 bills out every time she complains. This kid got very sweet. When she was coming around at bedtime, Daddy, is there anything else I can do for you before I go to bed? She's hoping to get some of those $10 bills back into the jar. Now, what's going on with this child? Heart change? Has the heart of grumbling and complaining and dissatisfaction with people and their expectations of her changed within? No. She wants the money. She'll do whatever she has to do to get the money. She's already thought of 15 different ways to spend that money. And so she'll do whatever she has to do to get the money. But see, that's a way of trying to manipulate the behavior. I was teaching this in the church that I served as a pastor for 32 years. And a man came to me afterwards and he said, I got sick of my kids saying to each other, shut up all the time. Shut up, you shut up. I said it first, you shut up. He said, I got tired of hearing them speak to each other in such a rude manner. And so I told the kids that from now on, every time you say shut up to each other, I'm going to fine you $1. It will cost you $1. And you've got to put $1 in this box every time you say shut up to each other. Well, I asked him, I said, how did it work? What happened? He said, you wouldn't believe it. Within 2 weeks, we had $100. I said, $100? That's a lot of money. He said, yeah, my wife and I were putting it in too. Now, what's going on in this family? Was their heart change? He said, after a while, nobody was saying shut up anymore. Now, we wanted to do something fun one weekend, and money's always tight, but we remember that $100. We went up for a movie and ice cream and pizza and spent $100. I said, what happened after that? He said, you wouldn't believe it. Within 2 weeks, they were saying shut up again. I said, you know what? I wouldn't believe it if you told me they weren't. Now, what's going on with these kids? Did their hearts change? No. They're making a marketplace decision. If I say, shut up, it's going to cost me $1. If I say, drop dead, it'll cost me nothing. So you just move from the expensive words to the free words. But there's no heart change. There's no deeper love for one another. There's no greater respect for one another inside. They've just dropped the words that will cost $100. And that's what behaviorism does. Behaviorism doesn't address the deepest needs of our children. Behaviorism simply manipulates the behavior. And you can do it with incentives or with disincentives. One mom came up with a very positive idea. She said, I told my children, every time you guys do something nice, some random act of kindness toward one another, I'm going to write your name on a piece of paper and put it in this box. And she got a shoebox, covered it with tinfoil, put an opening in the top. Excuse me. Whenever you do something nice, I'll put your name in the box. And at the end of the week, we're going to shake up the box. The person whose name is drawn gets a prize, something really worth having. Now, you know how that works with children. The children realize the point here is to get your name in the box as many times as possible, because that'll improve your odds of being the one whose name is drawn at the end of the week. And of course, you want to get in as many times as possible with as little actual sharing as possible. So mother's coming down the hallway, and the child realizes there's no point in sharing if mother's not nearby. I mean, what is the point of sharing in the playroom when mother's in the kitchen cooking? That's wasted sharing. That's not even good stewardship of sharing. So mother's coming down the hallway, and the child says, "Here, would you like to play with my truck?" Mother says, "Oh, honey, that's so nice. I know how much you love that truck. Oh, it makes me so happy that you're sharing it with your brother. I'm going to go write your name and put it in the box." So she goes off to write the name and put it in the box, and he says, "I didn't say how long." She comes back. "I thought you were going to let your brother play with your truck." "I did. He drove it across the room. I didn't say I was going to give it to him all day." You see, children will learn how to work the system, how to make it work for them. Any incentives you give or disincentives you give, because of the pollution of the heart, they will pervert those things to be self-centered and to be self-serving. And see, if you think about it, behaviorism appeals to things that are wrong within our children. We appeal to their avarice. We appeal to their greed. We appeal to their love of self. We appeal to their pride. Behaviorism hooks things that are wrong within your child and uses them as a motivation to get your child to do something that is externally appropriate. And ultimately, behaviorism will produce resentment on the part of children, because they will realize you are manipulating their behavior and they'll resent you for it. Now, I want you to think about this with me. If I know that behind the fight over the toy, the ungodly attitude behind fighting over the toy is love of self, what would the godly attitude of heart be behind sharing the toy? The attitude of heart behind sharing the toy would be love for others rather than love for self. Love for self will result in fighting over the toy. Love for others would produce an attitude of willingness to share the toy with my sibling. Now imagine with me that I ignore the love of self that is behind the fight over the toy. I manipulate the behavior. I get the child to share the toy, even though his heart is full of self-love. I'm manipulating his behavior through some form of behaviorism so he shares the toy. What do we call that kind of change? He's sharing the toy. Isn't that good? That is, in fact, exactly what Jesus condemns in the Pharisee. It's the heart of Phariseeism. Remember how Jesus says in Matthew chapter 22, he says, "Your Pharisees are like tombs that are clean on the outside and dirty on the inside." You're like cups, Jesus says, that are clean on the outside and dirty on the inside. And then between those statements, Jesus says these amazing words. "Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup, And then the outside will be clean. Jesus is giving us ordered steps. What is a matter of first importance? First, clean the inside of the cup. If the inside of the cup is clean, the outside of the cup is going to be clean. First, clean the inside of the cup, because cleaning the inside of the cup will clean the outside of the cup. In other words, what Jesus is saying to us is behavior will follow the heart. If the heart is right, behavior will be right. Behavior will follow the heart. And see, it's so easy for us as parents to hypocritically distance ourselves from our children, to be so full of pride within ourselves, and to be saying things like this to our children. I can't believe you're so selfish. Your little brother is 2 years old. He's going to take a nap in 5 minutes. Would it kill you if he played with your truck for 5 minutes? I can't believe you're so selfish. You uncircumcised Philistine. How'd you ever get into this Christian family? I can't believe your child of mine would be like this. Now, I would submit to you, that's hypocritical. Are there any of us, myself included, who do not understand how selfishness works in the human heart? We're compulsively self-serving and self-loving, are we not? We know how selfish we are. You know what it's like to look at the plate of cookies or sweets that are being passed around the table. And the plate is still 3 people away from you, but you're looking at that plate and trying to decide which is the most attractive sweet on the plate. And someone takes the one you were going to take. You say, that was my treat. Now, how did it get to be mine? It's still 3 people away from me. You see, I was lusting after that in my heart. It was winking at me. We had a relationship. You took my treat. Sometimes at night, my wife and I are getting ready to go to bed, and we sit in our rooms some nights and we read to each other and talk over our day. And it's a wonderful time of the day because the work is done for the day and we're enjoying one another's company. And I'll say to her, honey, would you like a dish of ice cream? And so I go to the kitchen and I get out the ice cream and I make 2 dishes of ice cream. I put the box of ice cream away, rinse off the ice cream scoop, make sure I didn't leave any ice cream on the counter so I don't get scolded in the morning for leaving a mess behind. I head back to our bedroom. I'm carrying these 2 cups of ice cream with me, feeling very proud of myself at this moment because I went to get the ice cream. I'm such a servant. I'm really serving my wife here. And I'm trying to think of some way to draw that to her attention because I don't want her to miss it. I mean, most guys would have said, hey, why don't you get us some ice cream? And I went to get the ice cream. And I'm sacrificing it. I want to make sure she realizes that. Now, while I'm congratulating myself on this act of self-sacrifice, at the very same time, I'm weighing these cups of ice cream. And I'm trying to decide which is the better cup of ice cream. Which is the one where I firmly compacted the ice cream into the cup. And which one is the one with these light, airy scoops of ice cream. Now, I'm embarrassed to tell you this, but sometimes I've marked them with different spoons. So I wouldn't forget when I got back to the bedroom which was the better cup of ice cream. Because it was a tragic moment when you realize, oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, and you got to switch. I mean, you have to get it right the first time. Now think of this. My dear wife has been washing my dirty socks for all these years, and I'm willing to cheat her out of a couple spoons of ice cream. And yet I will say to this 8-year-old, I can't believe you're so selfish. Do you see the hypocrisy of that? You see, that's where I will end up when I'm manipulating behavior. I'll end up hypocritically distancing myself from my children. Now, I mentioned earlier 2 columns that I want you to think about. I want you to think about, when we talk about it's out of the overflow of the heart that the mouth speaks, that's an abstract statement. What do we mean by overflow of the heart? And that's what I want to talk to you about for a minute. And I want you to encourage you to make some notes for yourself so you'll be able to remember some of these things after we're done. But I want you to think about two columns. We'll have one heading will be ungodly attitudes of heart. The other heading will be godly attitudes of heart. And the scripture, we're in this wonderful place as Christian people. We have incredible resources for understanding human behavior and for understanding motivation. Because the Bible is rich. The Bible is robust. The Bible is accurate in its descriptions of us. The Bible, as we saw in the last hour, and in Hebrews 4:12, judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. God sees through us with X-ray vision. He understands our hearts. So if you think about ungodly attitudes of heart, think of, for example, revenge, rather than the godly attitude of entrusting myself to God. Do you ever see any revenge behavior at your house? Did you ever hear these words? He hit me first. That's a revenge statement, isn't it? He had it coming. He deserves it. Serves him right. Because I'm taking revenge. I'm evening the score. I'm responding to evil with evil. Rather than entrusting myself to God. That's what Jesus did. 1 Peter chapter 2. When he was persecuted, he did not retaliate. Instead, he entrusted himself to the one who judges justice. So on this ungodly attitude column, we have revenge. Godly attitude corresponding is entrusting myself to God. Or we could think of the fear of man rather than the fear of the Lord. The fear of man will prove to be a snare, the Proverbs say. The fear of the Lord is the first step in the path of wisdom. Think of the number of things that are motivated by the fear of man, by worry and concern about what will people think of me. Think how easy it is even to train your children to respond out of self-conscious concern for what will others think of me, rather than what will please God, what will honor God, what will reflect loving God and loving others. What will people think of me? That's the fear of man, rather than the fear of the Lord. Or we could think of pride rather than humility. Imagine an 8-year-old boy playing checkers with his 6-year-old sister. The game gets to the point where he realizes she is going to beat me. I cannot possibly win this game. And he suddenly decides, this game's boring. I hate checkers. Flips the checkerboard over, goes out of the room. What's going on with this child? Pride. It's bad enough to lose the checker game, but to lose to your sister, who's 2 years younger than you, that's a fate worse than death. Pride rather than humility, or love of self rather than others, love for others. I was talking to a mom one time. She said, every time we're doing something fun at home, my children are jumping up and down. Me first, me first, me first. So she said, I taught them that verse that says the first will be last and the last will be first. So you know what the children were doing? They're jumping up and down saying, me last, me last, me last. See, we have that compulsive desire to serve ourselves. Love of self rather than love for others. Or if another motivation, ungodly attitude of heart would be self-preservation, rather than being willing to lay down my life for others. Jesus says, greater love has no one than this, that a man would lay down his life for his friends. Or we could think of fear, rather than knowing the perfect love that drives out fear. It's interesting, the Bible's, the correspondent, the opposite of fear in the Bible is not bravery. It's being confirmed in the love of God. Perfect love, 1 John 4 says, drives out fear. In other words, if you are perfected in the love of God, if you understand God loves me, God will care for me, God will provide for me, come what may, I'm held by God and provided for by God, and he will care for me always. That perfect love will drive out fear. Perfect love drives out fear. Or think of Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So we may say with confidence, the Lord is my helper, whom shall I fear? For what can man do to me? Or we could think of covetousness rather than generosity of heart toward others. Preserving what is mine, holding on to it, not being willing to share. Or envy rather than a desire for the good of others. One writer made a distinction between covetousness and envy, and he said covetousness is wanting what someone else has. Envy is even uglier than that. It's wanting to strip them of what they have, even if I can't have it. Or we could think of hatred rather than love. Sometimes even in our Christian homes, we'll hear those horrible words. It ought never to be said, I hate you. Or we could think of anger rather than peacemaking. Have you ever been trying to reconcile two children that have had a breakdown, and one is willing to make up and have it be done, and the other one is sitting there? He will not be reconciled to his sibling. He's going to retain his anger. And we see the difference between anger and peacemaking. Or we think of bitterness rather than forgiveness. Bitterness is what happens to me when I fail to extend forgiveness. Or we could think of a desire to be approved by others rather than a desire for God's approval. People pleasing rather than God pleasing. Or we could think of anxiety and fear. Paul talks about that in Philippians 4. People filled with anxiety and fear rather than knowing peace and contentment in any and every situation. Or we could think of rebellion rather than submission. Now, each of these are motivational things. They're attitudes of heart that motivate behavior. And when we say it's out of the overflow of the heart that the mouth speaks, this is what we're talking about. This is some of the particular content of the attitudes of heart that are behind things that we do and say that are wrong, that push and pull our behavior. And what we want to do in these with our children is give them an understanding of these attitudes of heart. Let me suggest to you a way that you could do that. You could take this list, and I hope you have made some notes. You could take this list and you could look up each of these words in a concordance because they're biblical words. Revenge, for example, or vengeance. Look up every passage you can find about revenge. And get a notebook for your kids. Call it the Heart Notebook. Let them decorate the cover of the notebook. Get a notebook with pages that are sewn in or stapled in so that it can't be easily lost. And fill that notebook with truth from the Word of God. Look up every passage you can find on revenge. Have your children write out the passage. Romans 12, for example. Do not be overcome with evil, my friends, but overcome evil with good. So it's being revenge is being overcome with evil. Or don't return evil for evil, it says in Romans 12. So you write those passages out that are against revenge. Talk about the passage with your kids. Get them to give you illustrations. What does revenge look like in an 8-year-old boy? They'll be able to tell you. What does revenge look like in an 8-year-old girl? It'll probably be different because there are differences in the ways that boys and girls respond because God has wired them differently. But have them write those things out in their heart notebook. Write out illustrations. Talk to them about the idea of revenge. Look up every passage you can think of that uses the word revenge. Write those passages in the heart notebook. Discuss them. Now here's how I would suggest doing it. 10 minutes. Maximum 10 minutes. You don't want to do this exercise for an hour and a half. If you get out the heart notebook and you do it for an hour and a half, the next time you suggest the heart notebook, the kids will be saying, oh no, not the heart notebook. I hate the heart notebook. Don't make me do the heart notebook. I'll be good, please. You don't want to do that. Get in and out of the activity quickly. 10 minutes. Write a passage out. Discuss the passage. Think of some illustrations of it. Put the notebook away. Get it out another day. Write out another passage on revenge. Discuss revenge again. You're talking to them about motivation. You're helping them to think about it and to think it out. You do this in non-confrontational times. You don't do this as a means of correction when they've been taking revenge, because those are not teachable moments. They're resistant to your teaching at that moment. They've dug in their heels. They're not going to listen. We talked about that in our first hour. You don't want to be doing that during those times of correction. But in non-confrontational times, no one is in trouble. It's just a time when, as a family, we're looking at God's words together, we're making some notes, we're writing some things down in our heart notebook, and then you'll put it away, you'll get out another day, look up another passage. So you talk about revenge. Talk about the opposite of that, entrusting yourself to God. Think of Jesus, the primary example. First Peter chapter 2. When he was persecuted, he did not retaliate. Instead, he entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. Jesus is a perfect example of entrusting himself to the just judge. Or we could think of David. Saul has been trying to take David's life. David goes into the cave. He has the opportunity to take revenge. He could have taken Saul's life. But instead, he only cuts the corner off his garment. He's not going to touch the Lord's anointed. He's going to wait for God's time. He's entrusting himself to God and for God's timing for him to take the throne and to become the king. Write those illustrations out in your heart notebook. And over time, months perhaps, maybe even years, you could unpack all those terms that I gave you to describe attitudes of heart. Unpack those for your kids. Look them up in the Bible. Discuss them. Talk about them. Look at verses. Discuss those verses. Do this in non-confrontational times when no one's in trouble. You're simply opening truth up. And over time, you could give your children a fund of knowledge about the importance of the heart. My wife had a young girl, a 15-year-old girl, come to her at the beginning of the school year. She said, Mrs. Tripp, I need to talk to you because I'm having trouble getting along with the girls in school. Now, that's not surprising if you know what 15-year-old girls are like. 15-year-old girls are often very competitive with each other and can be very unkind to one another, and it's not uncommon for girls to have trouble getting along. But what followed was very uncommon. This 15-year-old girl said, I know, Mrs. Tripp, some of the problem is I'm proud, I'm judgmental, I'm self-righteous. I think I'm off-putting to the other girls. That kind of insight, that kind of self-evaluation on the part of a 15-year-old, that's incredibly uncommon. Where does it come from? See, this girl is from a family where they talk about heart attitudes. She's from a church where the pastors are not preaching moralistic sermons about how we can be bright, shiny Christians on the outside, but are making insightful analysis of our internal struggles with sin. She's from a school where these things are foundational for correction and discipline and motivation in the Christian school she's part of. And so she is learning about her heart and all these very important arenas of her life. I want to just take a parenthesis for a moment. And I want to make an observation here. I'm very concerned about the impact of technology on our kids. And I think this is a good place to think about it, because gaming, phones, all this technology is providing a narrative for our children all the time. I mentioned that some in even my first lecture with you. And we need to be helping our children understand these attitudes of heart, because it's only understanding their hearts that will inoculate them against the dangers of this connected world. And I think many times Christian parents open up their kids to gaming and to phones and iPads and computers and all kinds of technology without any real careful thought or intentionality about how to control and manage it. So what I want to suggest to you is that before you open the gaming device, the Xbox or PlayStation, or whatever the gaming device, before you open the gaming device, you make an agreement with your children about where gaming fits into family life. You play the games, for example, after school, after homework, after your chores have been done, and decide how long you think it's appropriate for you to play a video game each day. Half hour, hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, you decide. I'm not even telling you what to do, but make an agreement with your children. This is where it fits. This is when you do it. This is how long. And you sign the agreement, they sign the agreement. And I want to make a suggestion to you about phones, because phones are very, very dangerous. Because a phone can open up worlds to your children that are very destructive to them spiritually. So I have a suggestion: never give your children a cell phone. If you think they're ready for a phone, you can say to them, I have a phone here. It's my phone. I bought it. It's on my plan. I pay the bill every month. This is my phone. But I would like to let you use my phone, and you can use my phone under these conditions, and write out what your conditions are. Put it in writing. You sign it. They sign it. And if you're willing to accept the phone on those conditions, I have a phone that you can use. But since it's my phone, I have the passwords. And since it's my phone, I have the right to look at it anytime I want to. But if under those conditions you'd like to use my phone, I have a phone that I'd be happy to have you use. So you're not relinquishing control over the phone, and you always are retaining the right as a parent to look at the phone and to examine the phone to make sure you know where the phone is going, what's being done on the phone. And you can scroll through texts and through interactions that the phone has had. But I want to encourage you, don't just give a phone to your children. And here's a connection with this section of my lecture. If you think about these attitudes of heart, when do I know that my children are ready for unfettered exploration of the internet, use of their phones, and so forth? When are they ready? How do I know that they're ready? Because they're going to have to live in a connected world. That's the world in which we live. When I see them reflecting an understanding of these heart attitudes, when I see them reflecting an understanding of the difference between vengeance and entrusting myself to God, between the fear of man and the fear of God, pride and humility, love of self and love for others, self-preservation, being willing to lay down their lives, fear and knowing the perfect love of God that drives out fear, covetousness and knowing generosity of heart. When I see them reflecting and understanding these attitudes of heart and a desire to know God's help to live out of godly attitudes of heart, then they're ready. But until then, I need to be very careful with how I guard this technology and the use of the technology. You know, another aspect of this I think is so important is when my child is struggling with selfishness in their heart, I can respond to that, as I mentioned earlier, in a hypocritical way. I can't believe you're so selfish. Or I can respond to it in a genuine way that says, I understand. I understand the problem of selfishness in the human heart. I understand the problem of pride. I understand the problem of compulsive self-love. I understand the problem of being angry when someone hasn't done what I wanted them to do. I understand the problem of rebelling against authority. I understand. Whatever the struggle of your child, you can stand in solidarity with them as a parent. There are no ways that your children sin that you know nothing about. And you can stand in solidarity with them and say, I understand the struggle. And there's hope for you. And there's hope for me. There's hope for people like us, because Jesus has come into our world in flesh like our flesh. And he's lived in our world. He can see the world through our eyes. Hebrews 2 says that because he himself suffered when he was tempted, he's able to help us when we are tempted. We can approach his throne of grace and find mercy and grace to help us in our time of need. There's hope for us, because Christ is entered into our world, and there's hope for us in Christ. So rather than condemning him, I can really stand in solidarity with him and go to the cross with him. Because the hope for eternal change is the cross. It's repentance and faith. It's the power of Christ to change us internally, to make us people who love God and who love others. It's only grace that will produce that kind of change. In 1986, my wife and I and our 3 children, we took a bicycling vacation. Now, this may not sound like a vacation to you. It may sound like a crazy thing that Americans would do, but we took a cycling vacation that summer. We went from our home to Niagara Falls. It was about 650 miles, about 1,000 kilometers to the falls, and we rode our bikes. We spent 3 weeks riding our bikes, and we camped at night. We carried our tents, sleeping bags, everything on our bikes. And we would camp at the side of the road at night, and we would ride the next morning, and we rode every day. And we got to the falls, and I had this plan. When we got to the falls, I wanted to take a picture of the 5 of us there with our bicycles in front of us and the falls behind us. Because it was quite a feat to ride our bikes that far, and all of our friends and relatives had been teasing us and mocking us in advance to this trip, saying, you can't possibly ride your bikes that far, you're crazy, you'll never make it. When you give up on this crazy idea and decide to come home, we'll come and get you and bring you and your bikes home. So they had been teasing us and mocking us, and I wanted to take this picture of the 5 of us there at the falls with our bikes in front of us, having made it. It was going to be our Rocky picture. Here we are, we made it to the falls. We did it. And so I had in mind taking a picture and turning the picture into a postcard and sending the postcard to all of our friends and relatives as our triumphant note to our time together. So now in 1986, there were no digital cameras. This is back in the days when you had a roll of film in your camera. And there were 36 exposures on this roll of film. And I had saved one roll for this purpose. And my plan was to take 36 pictures of the same shot. So we would stand there with our bikes. I would set the timer, run and jump in the picture. We'd take the picture, go out, set the timer again, run and jump in the picture. I was going to do this 36 times, and then get the whole roll of film developed, turn it into postcards, send it to our friends and relatives. Well, this made perfect sense to me. It did not make sense to my 15-year-old son. After the first couple of pictures, he started sabotaging the pictures. So just as the camera would click, he would make some ghastly face, or he would put rabbit ears behind his sister's head, or he would turn and face the falls, so we would get a picture of the back of his head, or he spoiled one picture after another. Oh, I got so angry with him, and I berated him verbally, said all sorts of mean things to him, and demeaned him in very, very ugly, horrible ways. And of course, once I was done, here we are at the falls, just the 5 of us with our bicycles. We don't even have a vehicle, so we could all sit in the car and face the same way and not have to look at each other. Just the 5 of us with our bikes. And Dad just had a volcanic eruption, and the whole family's under the cloud of Dad's anger. So I got the family together, and I asked them to forgive me. I asked my son to forgive me. I'm sorry for the things I said. I apologize for my words. I'm sorry for what I said. I said things that I should not have said. I said things that were mean and unkind and hurtful. Please forgive me. Family, please forgive me. And I prayed. I look back at that day today, and I'm shocked, actually, at my lack of understanding and my lack of insight. because I apologized for my words. What I was missing was repentance for the attitudes of heart behind the words. Because what was going on with me that day? What was that all? Why was I so angry? I'm full of pride. I wanted to send this postcard to our friends. I imagined them getting this postcard and saying, look, they made it to the falls. What an amazing family. What a wonderful leader Ted Tripp must be. How lucky to be one of his children. What an incredible family. That's amazing. They could ride their bicycles 1,000 kilometers. Wow, what a family. You see what this was about? I was building a shrine to myself. I was building a shrine to our family. I was building a shrine to my leadership. A shrine about how wonderful my children and my wife were. It was all about pride and self-love and self-aggrandizement. It was ugly and perverse and wicked. And that's why I was so angry at my son. I was so angry at him because I was trying to build a shrine to my greatness and he was tearing it down. And I was angry. You see, it was those attitudes of heart that were motivating me. But that day, I lacked the insight that you have today into the importance of the heart. Because I apologized for my words, and I thought that was enough. And I never even thought about the attitudes of heart, the pride, the self-love, the low, slow burning anger that is always within me when someone doesn't do what I want immediately. All those things that were so wicked and perverse that were motivating my response to my son. See, that's where we need to go ourselves. And the more you make that kind of analysis of your times of anger and your sharp words with your children and with your spouse, and your negatively critical judgments of other people and their motives and what they do, the deeper you go with that within yourself, the more profoundly you'll be able to teach these things to your children. And the more deeply your children will be able to understand the attitudes of heart behind the things that they say and do that are wrong. Let me give you some questions to think about. Can you identify ways that your focus tends to be on behaviorism rather than the overflow of the heart? What are the ways that behaviorism appeal to things that are wrong within our children? How do we tend to focus on cleaning the outside of the cup rather than on the inside of the cup? Why does focusing on behavior and exclusion to the heart create a temptation toward hypocrisy toward our children? Temptation to hypocrisy toward our children. Why is it easier to get to the gospel when we focus on the heart? How does standing in solidarity with our children in their struggles make it easier for us to bring the hope of the gospel, or even the necessity of the gospel, to our children? I trust God will give you insight into those things. These are profound things that God can use to reshape the ways that you parent. And as you're a seminary student preparing for ministry, I hope you see there are tremendous implications of this for pastoral ministry, both for how I preach and teach, but also how I engage the people that I serve. Let me pray with you. Deepen, we pray, O God, our insights into these attitudes of heart that the scriptures teach us how to discern. We pray that we would be richly living out of the gospel with our children. We ask for Christ's great glory. Amen.